the show I was just describing to you, Wild Things for Paramount syndication, we had a 50-yard uh, perimeter that we had to honor. We couldn't get any closer than that. And then it is a judgment call. I have found pretty much if you leave the animals alone, they'll leave you alone. And depending on the parks that you're going to, they have become habituated to seeing vehicles. So they're not so worried about you. I mean, you have to be, they're wild animals and anything can happen. So you have to be smart about what you are doing, but you can get pretty close to an animal. I did this one story about cheetahs that were managing the wildlife on a Air Force base. So before the jets would come in and land, they had cheetahs that would essentially clear the runways. They of the warthog. They would push off the warthogs. There was a sergeant that had a really good relationship with these cheetah. And there was one evening when we were following the cheetah as they were just walking through the bush, and they had found this beautiful mound. And again, it was that end of the day, beautiful light, like the water hole that I described earlier. And the cheetah had just settled down for the end of the day. And the sergeant that we were with, he had such a good relationship that he could go right up to the cheetah. And so we were arm's length from the cheetah. And I tell you, my legs were like rubber. I was so scared, but we were able to get that close. So that was one of my early experience of getting very close to a cheetah in the wild. There was another story when, and this was on one of my first trips. We had, again, back end of the day, things happened at towards the end of the day when we would be returning to our camp. And we had a good day shooting, and we were laughing and having a really great time. And we had stopped the vehicle, and there was a stand of trees. And we had stopped because we could hear elephants, and you could see the dust kicking up. And then suddenly, out of the stand of trees, an elephant just bursts through and starts charging our vehicle. And a lot of times what an elephant will do, just to let you know, don't mess with me, they'll mock charge you. They'll come up a certain distance, stop, and then, do this with their ears and then back up. Well, this elephant was not stopping. It kept going and going and going for us. And the driver couldn't get his vehicle into gear. And the elephant maybe missed us by this much, no exaggeration, before we got the car into gear and went on our way. And the cameraman thought he was rolling, and he wasn't. He was so crushed that he missed the shot because it was an elephant in full charge. We had a lot of creative freedom and a lot of marketing support. And that had to do in large part with the confidence of Mark Burnett, because he was behind the production. So history came to Mark saying, we want to do a historical expedition. And then Mark came to me and said, will you develop this? And we, created the show together. And it was, so I could have spent my career, the rest of my career, just doing expedition shows. It is another one of my production highlights. I love that experience because of all the challenges, believe it or not. I'll give you a couple of them. First of all, the further west you went, we started in Zanzibar and took one of the the Dhow ships to sail across, which was a magnificent way to open up the series. These just billowing, beautiful sails, creamy white sails on this blue water. And then once we hit Bagamoyo on Tanzania, the continent, then the country on the continent of Africa, and then you went across Tanzania. The further west you went, the less resources you had, and we had to go back to the coast just to get things like apples. So we had a mobile camp. So we had 4 modern day explorers that were retracing Stanley's journey to find Dr. Livingstone, and we would build a base camp that would serve a couple of episodes, and we were leapfrogging our base camps. So as we would shoot 1 or 2 episodes, the next camp that we were going to was getting set up. Now, because the explorers were on foot, but we had vehicles, so we could cover more territory, and just we experienced everything from roads washing out to having to sit. This was a very real thing. They had to build fires at night. We had 2 Maasai that were their protection, and they would stand guard at night because in the bush you would have all kinds of hippos, baboons, lions that you had to stay on watch for throughout the night. So the dangers were very real, not to mention the snakes. And one of our explorers, interestingly enough, from a historical perspective, Stanley came down with malaria in Tabora, which was one of the main trade centers in Tanzania at the time. And one of our explorers got malaria at the same time. Yeah, I had paced ahead, scouting our next area, and so I was out of cell range for quite some time. And then suddenly I was able to pick up a signal, and I started to see all of these messages popping up on my cell phone. And each message, as I was listening to it, was getting like crazier and crazier in terms of anxiety, because one of our explorers had shut down with malaria. And I ended up I'm in the middle of the Ugala, which is just a very remote place known for all their hippos. And I had to backtrack to go find my crew and my sick explorer. And it ended up being a fantastic episode of what it was like for Stanley to have come down with malaria, and just how disoriented you become when you get malaria. I had reached a point in my life where I felt nothing was working. I felt that my professional life, I wasn't getting the shows that I wanted. And I always felt that at that moment, I felt that the shows were going to other producers that I didn't feel were more qualified than myself. So my career wasn't as I was wanting it to be. And then my personal life was also not as I wanted to be. And that X and Y of nothing working in my life, I sat in my Los Angeles office one afternoon and I said, I don't want to be taken down by this moment. I don't want to sit in this moment. I don't want it to define me. I don't want this to be my future. And I made a conscious choice that I wanted to be happy. And out of that then came action. Then I started reading about happiness and taking courses, and eventually I ended up with a PhD in conscious living. But it all came from life not working for me the way I wanted it, and not accepting that as that is going to be my lot, and doing something about it. And when people ask me, what is the key to happiness? That's what I say. It's choice. The key to happiness, from my point of view, is choice backed by action. It has to be intentional action that you do every single solitary day, and it's a vow you take. It actually came out of one of the chapters. I write about Nora Ephron and how she was speaking at her college at Wellesley, 34 years later, and addressing the women about not having excuses now because they didn't have, they don't have the excuses that her class did, of the glass ceilings and societal expectations. And in that message, she was saying, do you want to, just live a life where somebody else, or do you want to command your life? Do you want to direct your life? And so it was out of that when I subtitled that bullet point for that chapter. That's what it was: how to write, direct, and produce. And so that became the subtitle. I wanted a framework that made sense for someone like myself to write. So coming from a producing and directing and writing background, that made sense to me to use that terminology and that framework as credibility. I have studied. You look at. I have this producing background, and now I have this well-being background. But how do the two go together? And I thought that framing it as taking control of your life, producing your life, directing your life made sense given my background. So I sat down and I qualified for myself what I felt brought happiness to me. So having faith, having love, being grateful, being forgiving. I qualified what I call in my book the happiness essentials. And then I researched what I was experiencing and intuitively feeling. And that science, I researched to see if there was science to back up what I was intuitively feeling and experience. And that became my book. One of the big points that impacted my book that comes from my survivor experience, I would do the last episode. That was my that was my charge every season. And I was with the survivor contestants through the end. And having done Survivor for 7 seasons, Survivor itself is a microcosm for society. And having watched the best and worst behavior over 7 seasons, you would I would sit in interview with the contestants, and so often I would hear them say, "Oh, this isn't really me. This is me playing a game." And well, of course it's you. You just have not been put on a remote island vying for life-changing money to understand this aspect of your personality. And we all have untapped potential that we don't fully understand until we either are tested like the survivors or explore it. And I took that idea of exploration to create a book on happiness, a guide on happiness, and a companion app. The advice that I would like to leave those who are watching with: when you choose to be happy, you're making a choice that you then back up with action. And what my book does is it helps you to find positive moments throughout your day. And when you do this consistently, you create a positive neural pathway towards the good. And the more you do that, the more it becomes your habit. And when it becomes your habit, then you are able to reshape your well-being, reframe and have that awareness of when things are negative and unproductive. You have that awareness to take action, to shift it in a direction that is working for you. So I feel happiness is another word for resilience. You learn the virtues, qualities, and habits of happy people, which is what my book is about, so you can better navigate those challenging times. You recognize them sooner. You are better equipped to manage them. And when you're on the other side, you're more emotionally intact. And I feel that my book offers a very practical, accessible, and fun way to embody what makes us happier. And when you have activities that are fun to do, you are more likely to do them. And the more likely you are to do them, it just becomes your way of being.